from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, COVID tests hard to come by as cases rise. Now, President Biden is preparing to send 500 million free COVID tests to Americans' homes starting next month. Plus, Jack Dorsey stirs an uproar on Twitter, calling Web3 a venture capital plaything. The former Twitter CEO turning up the tweet heat since stepping down. And California has become the epicenter for retail crime, brazen and at times organized attacks. I'll talk with a district attorney who's helping fight back. We're going to get to all of that in a moment, but first let's get a look at the market. Stocks climbing once again after the biggest three-day drop since September. Kriti Gupta with us here for the latest. Kriti, take it away.
Yeah, Emily, a classic case of a turnaround Tuesday. We saw that major sell-off yesterday, and really, it's the sectors that lagged, that underperformed yesterday, that outperformed today, primarily technology stocks. And you can see that NASDAQ up 2.4%, really leading the charge. We can thank big tech for that. And of course, semiconductors as well. Micron played a big part in that rally. I really want to point out, though, that you're starting to see the VIX, that volatility gauge, drop closer and closer to 20. When it's above 20, when volatility is elevated, you do tend to have this kind of red zone, green zone idea where on one day the market sells off and then the next day it buys, followed by just another sell-off, much more driven by technical factors than actually fundamental ones, for example. And that's kind of the environment that we're going to be seeing, especially amid holiday trading. Let's get to those Micron earnings, though, because that's really kind of a major intraday story. We talked about them beating earnings last week, but take a look at this chart. On a year-to-date basis, Micron, which is the biggest U.S. semiconductor maker, is actually lagging the broader index. That's that white line. The yellow line is going to be that semiconductor index broadly. Now, the big question here is why has it been lagging? And a lot of it has to do with inventory digestion, essentially being able to keep up with capacity. But after last night's earnings, it looks like they're actually going to be catching up a little bit to their peers. And that's going to be a major story when we're talking about whether or not tech is going to be leading that recovery or leading the stock market broadly in 2022. I want to end, Emily, with the story that is on everyone's mind and for the markets nonetheless, and that is going to be the rise in COVID cases, specifically driven by the Omicron variant. 73% of national cases are now really tied back to that variant, and you're seeing those case counts really tick up. This is the 7-day moving average. The question is, does it peak at the same kind of level or at the same time frame that you're going to see in perhaps South Africa? And what does the affordability of testing and the availability of testing really have to do with that? That's something that the markets are going to keep a key eye on.
All right, Kriti, thank you for that update. Meantime, President of COVID-19 will result in more breakthrough infections and repeating his push for everyone who is eligible to get a booster shot.
We should all be concerned about Omicron, but not panicked. If you're fully vaccinated, and especially if you got your booster shot, you are highly protected. And if you're unvaccinated, you're at a higher risk of getting severely ill from COVID-19, getting hospitalized, and even dying. So the best thing to do is get fully vaccinated and get your booster shot.
The president outlining a new strategy to curb the impact of Omicron. The administration will order 500 million at-home tests to ship free to Americans, dispatch military service members to support hospitals, and set up new testing and vaccination sites. Bloomberg's Jeannie Bowman joining us now with more. Jeannie, why is the president doing this now?
Well, I think especially, as you mentioned, with the onset of the Omicron variant, and especially as we're going into the, winter months, the deeper winter months, and there's hospitals are really hitting capacity, and so they want to make sure that they're prepared for a potential overflow with Omicron really taking up 73% of cases in the U.S.
So give us more highlights of the plan and specifically the plans to expand testing.
Right. So they're going to send 500 million. They're going to make 500 million tests available to people who request them. They're supposed to be available next month, although it's less clear how many will exactly be available at that time. And then they're going to start reimbursing at-home tests as of January 15th, I think, is when the guidance is supposed to come out. And of course, the administration has faced criticism for some time about testing, and that it should be cheaper, it should be more widely available, and so I think this is in part a response to that.
Meantime, the FDA is preparing to sign off on pills from Pfizer and Merck to treat COVID-19. What do we know about this? And, is this a game changer, or is really the message still to get vaccinated, get boosted?
So I think both. It could definitely be a game changer, especially to keep people out of the hospitals when the concern is that hospitals could be at or over capacity with the Omicron variant. So if you can, get these pills to high-risk people and they can take it at home, so it's much easier to administer than a monoclonal antibody because it's a pill that you take at home, it could potentially keep people from getting really sick. But at the same time, the big push, of course, the best way to prevent yourself from getting sick is to get vaccinated and boosted.
All right, Bloomberg's Jeannie Bowman. Obviously, so many precautions we all need to continue to take, especially over the next few days. Jeannie Bowman, thank you very much. Meantime, we are still waiting for a verdict in the trial of Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes. The jury spending a second day deciding whether the 37-year-old entrepreneur is guilty of defrauding investors and patients over the failed blood testing startup. For the latest, we're joined by Bloomberg's Joel Rosenblatt, who has been at the courthouse all day long. Joel, last time we talked, we've been checking in. You said there were no notes to the judge from the jury, no communication whatsoever. Is that still the case? And is it unusual to hear nothing from a jury over 48 hours?
Still the case, Emily. We've heard the jury and usual, like a spokesman for the jury, feeling kind of wanting something. If
we're having some technical difficulties there with your shot, Joel. Hopefully we can get back to you a bit later in the show. Joel Rosenblatt there at the San Jose courthouse, where, as you heard, the jury continuing to deliberate now, I believe, 16 hours or so of deliberations. Meantime, the electric car startup Nikola will pay a $125 million penalty to the SEC. It has to do with allegedly misleading statements its founder and former CEO Trevor Milton made to investors about the company's technological advancements. Milton stepped down in September 2020 and still faces criminal and civil charges for his statements. Nikola is saying it'll pay the fine over the next 2 years and seek reimbursement from Milton. Coming up, Jack Dorsey may have stepped down as CEO of Twitter, but he's stepping up his game on the platform, dismissing Web3 as a venture capital plaything. We'll bring you details next. This is Bloomberg. Fresh off relinquishing the CEO reins at Twitter, Jack Dorsey has taken to the service he co-founded to voice his displeasure with the direction of so-called Web3 technology and the influence of venture capital firms like Andreessen Horowitz. Dorsey tweeting, "You don't own Web3. The VCs and their LPs do. It will never escape their incentives. It is ultimately a centralized entity with a different label." Know what you're getting into. To discuss, we are joined by Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, who covers Twitter and Square for us. Kurt, what do you make of Jack's more outspoken and slightly combative tweets since stepping down as CEO of Twitter?
Well, he has historically been a little snarky at times. We've seen him, not be afraid to go after folks in a very friendly way. This feels a little aggressive just because I think the community around Web3 and crypto is so passionate, so strong on Twitter. He had to have known what he was getting himself into when he did this. And I think that, he's clearly trying to point out here that there's going to be a bit of a tension between building a technology that is supposed to be completely decentralized and not kind of owned or operated by any one company, and the fact that these technologies are being funded by companies, in fact, like his own, right, in some cases. And so I do think that there's a healthy tension there, but he certainly walked into it knowing full well that it was going to be a tough conversation on Twitter because that community there is huge.
Well, and speaking about walking into it, this is another Twitter exchange with Chris Dixon, a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. Dixon tweeting about winning, Jack replying, "You're a fund determined to be a media empire that can't be ignored, not Gandhi." Dixon replying that he respected Jack and hoped he could bring him around on Bitcoin and other blockchains. How does this message about Web3 that Jack is trying to disseminate and taking on Andreessen Horowitz tie into what he has planned at Square and his vision for the blockchain?
Well, these companies, like at both Twitter and Square, Jack has set up groups that are looking into this technology, but ideally these groups are operating, independently. Now, in Twitter's case, it's called Blue Sky. It's supposed to be this social network protocol that's totally, operating on its own. Twitter built it up and gives it funding, but otherwise keeps its hands away from it, right? And I think that's ultimately what Jack kind of envisions here, is not letting these technologies be owned by any one particular company, but instead maybe getting them started with money from a Twitter or Square, and then letting them be completely on their own. Now, I think that's a pretty idealistic thing. Clearly, we're seeing a lot of venture money flow into this space right now. But my guess is that he feels like he's doing it differently than a firm like Andreessen Horowitz. I'm sure there are many people who might, poke some holes in that argument.
Then there's this last exchange between, and there's plenty, but this is the last notable one that we've pulled out, between Elon Musk and Jack. Elon Musk saying, "Has anyone seen Web3? I can't find it." And Jack saying it's somewhere between A and Z, obviously. A nod to Andreessen Horowitz there. What do you make of the two of them aligning, it seems, at least on Twitter?
Well, Jack has actually said for years that Elon is his favorite tweeter. And so the two are close. And Elon actually showed up at a Twitter all hands a few years ago as kind of a special guest. It's a little controversial for him to say he's his favorite Twitter, because Elon likes to kind of push the envelope and walk the line as to what's appropriate on Twitter, as you probably know, Emily. But nonetheless, the two of them do get along, and they were on a Bitcoin panel together a few months ago as well. So they're clearly both very interested in this space. They have a relationship. And so it doesn't surprise me to see Jack and Elon kind of buddying up, if you will, over a conversation like this.
All right, well, it'll be interesting to watch a potentially snarkier Jack Dorsey post Twitter. Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner, thank you for some color there. Meantime, I want to get back to the San Jose courthouse, where the jury is deliberating in the trial of founder Elizabeth Holmes. Our Joel Rosenblatt back with us. Joel, as we were discussing earlier, it sounds like still no word, no notes, no nothing at all yet from the jury. Is that unusual?
It's not unusual, Emily. I feel a little bit like a spokesman for the jury, because I'm getting many emails, many questions about what's going on and why we're not hearing anything. My colleagues in the media are all very on edge, waiting for something, and we're hearing nothing. A few things to say about that, Emily. The first is there's a number of kind of different forces at work here. The first is that if the jury wanted to acquit Elizabeth Holmes, they would have done that maybe early. Acquittals tend to come early. They look at the government's evidence, say there's nothing there, or you didn't make the case. She's free to go. The second is that they're deliberating all this evidence. We forget, I think it's easy to forget that they've only had 2 days to consider 3 months worth of testimony and evidence. So they're going through all of that and doing what we'd expect them to do, what we'd actually hope them to do. If they're going to do Elizabeth Holmes the real service that they need to do, if they're looking to find her guilty, they need to go through everything very carefully and find that she's either guilty or innocent. So 2 to 5 days is hardly unexpectable. It's something that we would expect them to do. I think that they will go at least through probably Thursday. They're taking tomorrow off.
That was my next question. They're taking tomorrow off due to a juror commitment, and then Thursday, and then it's Christmas Eve. Is there a plan for after that?
Well, there are no plans set. Certainly the judge will push them to come back on Monday and get going again. But you raised another force at work here, which is Christmas. So though they want to be thorough, though they want to be careful, and we'd hope that they're doing that, and they're instructed to do that, Christmas is a force. Nobody wants really to have this kind of hanging around over the holiday. So that's at work too here. I think they're gonna want to finish by Thursday. A final point, Emily, is that these jurors are just now actually getting to know each other, getting to talk. While they've been together for a few months, they were instructed to not discuss the case. So this is the first time they have had to get to learn each other's opinions about what they heard and what to consider. So let's not forget that they need to sort this all out and give them some time to do it.
Interesting point there, Joel. And of course, you've been in the trial every step of the way, every day, along with them. Bloomberg's Joel Rosenblatt will keep following. An hour and 45 minutes left in the day of deliberations today. We'll see if it continues into Thursday. Meantime, at least 132 employees at SpaceX's California headquarters have tested positive for COVID-19 in recent months. That is the largest non-residential confirmed case count in LA County. The company sent a memo to workers explaining only one of the 132 employees is suspected of contracting the virus at work. The others contracted, they say, outside of work. The cases come during a busy stretch for the company, which has completed 4 Falcon 9 launches since December 9th, including a cargo supply mission to the International Space Station early Tuesday. Coming up, potential regulation for the buy now, pay later business. We'll talk to Affirm CEO Max Levchin about what it means for consumers next year. This is Bloomberg. On December 16th, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau announced a review of leading buy now, pay later firms. That would include Affirm. CEO Max Levchin quickly responding on Twitter saying, for the avoidance of doubt, Affirm very much welcomes regulatory attention to BNPL. Questions CFPB is asking, for example, what are your late fees, reactivation fees, other fees are indeed the right ones? The answer is, fortunately, very easy for us, 0. Max Levchin with us now. Max, good to have you back with us. So tell us more about the questions that you're being asked and the answers that you're giving.
Sure. And I think you sort of front-ran my answer a little bit by quoting my tweet, but I do think it's a very good thing. I think there are 3 separate things that are worth sort of just quickly recounting what's really going here. This is great for the consumer. Buy now, pay later is a brand new thing. It's growing really quickly. There are few standards. There's not really a lot of agreement on what's good and what's bad, and different actors behave differently. The fact that CFPB is looking at protecting consumers is a good thing. Like, these consumers deserve excellent protection, and that's what CFPB is there for. So good. It's also good for the industry in a sense that there's plenty of actors like Affirm that want to do the right thing, are excited to play by the rules, want to make sure that we do everything exactly to the degree that the law requires and better. And yet a lot of things are yet to be clarified. And so CFPB looking at the industry and expressing what it is that they think is going well and not well is a positive for the industry as it seeks standardization. And ultimately, I think it's great for Affirm because we've always taken it upon ourselves to do better than the law, to actually outperform what's expected of us. We don't charge late fees. We don't do any crazy gimmicks. We don't do reactivation fees or deferred interest or any of that garbage. And so as a result, if any of that becomes the new standard, we're already compliant. Right. And I think levels out the industry. So all of that, I think, is just very, very strongly positive. The request for data is actually public. You can have a look at CFPB's press release and they sort of detail what it is. And there's literally a giant spreadsheet of what are your late fees? What are your reactivation fees? I go and like literally, I will have a delightful little Christmas time going 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's it. There's plenty of other information requested around things like data protection and usage of data, all the things that you would expect a regulator to care about. And we will have our thoughtful answers. And I hope my peers in the industry will do the same.
Now, Capital One, for example, is planning to launch an option for buy now, pay later at point of sale next year. Curious what your plans are to add some additional protections that credit cards offer, like fraud protection, easy chargebacks for returns, for example.
I think we already do quite a lot today. We don't, and I don't think I know. I added, I think, because I'm surprised this is not as well known. So we stand in front of fraud. We obviously take all the risk that the merchant does not get paid. Like we sell with the merchant immediately. The consumer repayment is our risks to bear. We try very hard to make sure that we're available by all possible channels for our consumers to talk to us, et cetera, et cetera. So we hold ourselves to account to be a viable replacement to credit cards. That includes being available, being accessible, and ultimately being easy to deal with if something goes wrong.
So you're launching a new debit card also that'll allow for easy indoor shopping. I believe there's a pre-assigned limit to shop in store. Tell us a little bit more about when that'll launch, how it will work, and what it could mean for revenue.
So it's already live. There are thousands of consumers. As a public company, I now have to be careful exactly disclosing any numbers, but there are thousands of people that have the card in their hands, and it's pretty sweet. It doesn't require you to change your bank account. It allows you to pay in two different ways. You can swipe or chip the Affirm card, and if you do nothing, it will settle against your existing checking account. But over the next 24 hours, you can say, oh, you know what? I meant for this to be a buy now, pay later transaction. And with a couple of taps, you convert it to a pay over time. And it works both online and offline. There's all kinds of neat bells and whistles. That's in sort of final beta. We'll bring it out to a larger part of our wait list. I actually believe that the invitations just went out to email to the next larger group of the very, very sizable at this point wait list. I've said it to my analyst community, and I'll say it here again, don't start forecasting any huge revenue just yet. This is very, very early days. This is one of the very, very important products for us. We want to make sure we really get it right. If it takes us longer to get it perfect, we'll take longer. If it's beautiful and perfect on day one, we'll bring it out to as many people as we can. But right. I'm not promising revenue on this one.
Just 30 seconds left, Max. Quickly, I know that BNPL has been hot this holiday season. Curious how impactful the Walmart and Amazon relationships have been, and whether you've taken much of a hit because of Peloton on the other end.
As a public company, you'll see us speak about all those things in some detail early next year when we report earnings. But obviously, this was the first Christmas season for us, and it's still ongoing, where we cover 60% of e-commerce. We have a really rich deep partnership with Walmart. We have one with Shopify that's in fairly advanced stage at this point. We have hundreds of thousands of merchants here, Amazon, et cetera. So it's a very, very big year for us.
Max Levchin, CEO of Affirm, always good to have you with us. Thank you for that update. Coming up, retail crime in California is reaching a breaking point. My next guest says there's no leniency for anyone engaging in these well-organized smash and grab robberies. My conversation with the San Mateo County District Attorney about the steps he's taken to stop these crimes. That is next. This is Bloomberg. The global pandemic has changed us all, the way we live, the way we work, the way businesses operate, and it is no more evident than in the retail sector. While brick and mortar stores suffered, elsewhere, big investments were made in technology and e-commerce as merchants looked for new methods to connect with their consumers. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostic explains.
The pandemic shock to the global economy disrupted every sector of business, but it was the severe blow to retailers that is now proving to have the most transformational industry effect.
Retail is like the 9/11. It's a hurricane.
In early 2020, physical stores closed their doors. Customers and workers alike locked down at home. What was supposed to be a temporary sacrifice turned into more than a year-long struggle to remain viable. That struggle was insurmountable for some retail chains, and many of the mom and pop stores just seemingly disappeared overnight. But the pandemic also spurred overdue change that is increasingly being seen as a net positive for global retail, which has already seen a startling turn from where it was in mid-2020.
We have consumers who basically have the dollars to spend. Retailers are giving them innovative products.
The pandemic created the incentive that many needed to fully commit to e-commerce rather than just dabbling around the edges.
We'll walk side by side with our guests with a business that's flexible to how they want to shop, whether that's a box on their doorstep or increasingly a drive-up trip to one of our parking lots or the classic in-store trip.
In China, stores started selling goods via live video streams. In Mexico and Russia, companies built more secure payment systems to make consumers comfortable shopping online. In Brazil, retailers turned to instant messaging platforms like WhatsApp to offer promotions and finalize transactions. And here in the US, chains added features like video calls to ease the reticence to making those big purchases online. And while the online pivot allowed companies to regrow in an unprecedented time, brick and mortar is far from dead. Physical store shelves are still where the overwhelming majority of goods are bought. In the US, chains with more than 50 stores, they're expected to add more than 4,000 locations this year. And that'll mark the first increase since 2017. Many of the country's biggest chains are drawing a lot more shoppers than before the pandemic. Target, Lowe's, Foot Locker, Ulta Beauty, and Bath & Body Works. The comeback is a big reason why the Spider S&P Retail ETF has surged this year, beating the S&P 500's advance. The innovation and intertwining of brick and mortar and the internet, spurred by COVID, have allowed retailers to recover and come out stronger than ever. Now the question becomes, will the changes stay resilient in the face of Omicron?
And while we've seen an increase in retail activity, we've also seen an increase in retail crime, especially here in California. These thefts have not only become more brazen, but also organized as criminals break into stores and steal millions of dollars in merchandise. On Monday, the U.S. Justice Department announced a $1.6 billion grant to help cities combat that rise in crime. This just days after California Governor Gavin Newsom announced what he calls an aggressive plan to fight and prevent crime.
I want to acknowledge that it's unacceptable what's happening. We are putting out over $250 million in enforcement grants, competitive enforcement grants, to help local law enforcement advance their efforts.
Joining me now is Stephen Wagstaff. He is the San Mateo County District Attorney, which is part of the San Francisco Bay Area. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. You have now joined up with several different prosecutors in the Bay Area to try to crack down on this wave of organized retail crime. Tell us what you're seeing.
Well, we're seeing something that we have not seen over the years, and that is large groups, really a mob that charges into these stores to the retail, both the big stores and the mom and pop stores, and tries to clean them out in a matter of 1 or 2 minutes and then be on the road. And literally, they had in San Francisco in November, they had 80 people going to Union Square stores. Walnut Creek, they had 70 to 80 people charging in. That's new for us. And it's not just happenstance. It's not just a group who say, let's go do this. It's organized. And that's what we have to respond to in law enforcement and in prosecution.
So, there was obviously an uptick around Thanksgiving. We are now 4 days before Christmas. As you point out, this has been going on for a while now, and I understand that your office recently announced one of the largest retail theft busts in California history. So are you saying these are all organized? They're not sort of crimes of opportunity, not sort of spontaneous things that are just happening?
It falls into two categories. The first category is, and neither one is spontaneous. It's just a matter of how well planned it is. On one side, you have the case that you just referred to. That was very well organized. That had gone on. It truly was a criminal enterprise, structured and long lasting. But in addition to that, what we saw in November and we've seen in December is these sort of, again, I use the phrase mobs charging into stores. It's organized in that it's a group putting together and then sending out the word, hey, we're going to go do this. And people just flock in. So I would call it in the middle. It's not like a sideshow where it just happens to be Friday night and people show up to see the cars spin around. It's more than that. License plates are being covered up. They are looking for law enforcement with their cell phones and exchanging information where officers are located. And then they're charging in with the knowledge that they want to be in and out within 1 to 2 minutes so that the police cannot respond in a timely fashion. That is, again, it's not the mob, but it's fairly organized.
I spoke with the CEO of The Real Real, one of the stores that has been targeted in the Bay Area. Take a listen to what she had to say.
We've been hit by mob robbery, and it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem in the state of California. It's happened to us in New York. This is not a police problem. This is a problem with criminals are not being prosecuted for retail or property crimes. It is a serious problem.
Is that the reality, Stephen? Is that why these keep happening?
No, I don't think so. I think there may be that image out there, depending on what county that you're in. I know in my county, we're renowned. We prosecute everything. I know where Real was hit in Palo Alto, Santa Clara County District Attorney prosecutes these cases. And now we've all agreed here in the Bay Area, all of our Bay Area County DAs, we've joined together, we've formed a committee, and we've agreed we need to work together to aggressively prosecute these people. We're distinguishing these criminals from your person who goes in, commits a theft, loads up a basket with stuff to sell it to try and feed an addiction, a drug addiction or something like that. Those are the people we want to help. That's not what we're seeing here in November and December. We're seeing people that are doing it for pure profit motive. They're essentially looting these stores, and they need to be prosecuted. And every one of us, no matter what our DA philosophy is in the individual county, we all agree we need to aggressively prosecute these people, treat them for what they are, just profit mongers. They're not there to try and feed a habit. They're trying to just make money on it. And for that, there's no leniency, as was noted earlier. For us in San Mateo County, we're asking our judges, we're going to hold them accountable, and we want them punished.
Are you seeing these attacks being organized via social media? And if so, what platforms?
You know what? It'll vary as to the platform. I don't want to go too much into that because we don't want the criminals to know exactly what we're watching. But yes, there's an enormous amount of social media exchange as to what goes on. And it follows up with what happens after the theft. These thieves do not just take 10 Louis Vuitton purses to hand off to their friends at Christmas. They're doing it to sell defenses. They're putting it out there. And that's the other thing law enforcement and prosecutors are doing. We're going to find the fences, and we're really going to hammer down on them, because if you cut them off, then there's no source for the people doing the thefts to sell their goods. And that's a tactic we've also agreed as a group to try and attack this problem.
Well, in that case, if these are being organized via social media, do you think the platform should be doing more to crack down? I mean, is there anything that can be done to hold them accountable?
Well, there is, I think, particularly in terms of assisting. And I think they want to. I know our law enforcement community here in the San Francisco Bay Area has had discussions and planning meetings with the head of these social platform groups to try and get their assistance. And I am told that they are more than willing to offer whatever help they can, because they recognize the problem and they don't want to be a vehicle for crime. And I think we're going to have some positive outcomes on that as we move forward here.
All right, San Mateo County District Attorney Stephen Wagstaff. Stephen, thank you for sharing your perspective with us. Coming up, the rise of telehealth. We're going to talk about why VCs are betting big on the online healthcare sector well beyond the global pandemic. More on that coming up next. This is Bloomberg. With the world still grappling with variants and public health challenges, telehealth is poised to get even bigger. Monday, software giant Oracle announced it's acquiring electronics records company Cerner for $28.3 billion, a massive deal. This after Cerner named Oracle rival AWS its preferred cloud provider back in 2019. I want to bring in Sapphire Ventures partner Kathy Gao to help make sense of all of this. So, Kathy, what do you make of this acquisition? What does Cerner bring to Oracle, especially in light of the former AWS relationship?
Absolutely. It's great to be back on the show, Emily. This is a major acquisition by Oracle. In fact, it's their largest acquisition ever, and it's a massive deal in the space. Cerner, as you mentioned, is a leading electronic medical records company, an EMR company, with about a quarter market share. And this acquisition really gives Oracle a trove of health data and, of course, an opening for Oracle Cloud. I think this deal certainly gives Oracle a boost in the healthcare space versus competitors from a footprint perspective. But I have no doubt Oracle's competitors are not going to be sitting on their hands. In fact, Microsoft earlier this year had announced an acquisition of Nuance.
What do you think this means for AWS?
I think it means that companies like Oracle, like Microsoft, and others, including Salesforce, are now all seeing the health tech space as a huge opportunity. Remember, the market for healthcare in the US is a $4 trillion market. It's ginormous. And all the large cloud providers are now trying to gain a significant foothold in this health industry.
Now, talk to us about where you see this going in the context of healthcare and healthcare technology, which, to be fair, was quite slow to take off, but has been accelerated as a result of the pandemic.
Absolutely. The reason why I'm so excited to talk about this topic is healthcare has really been undergoing a massive transformation over the past 2 years. Over the past 2 years, we saw telehealth go mainstream. We saw COVID vaccines get developed, distributed, including going through full clinical trials in under a year. Now, this was just unheard of before COVID. The average drug takes about 10 years to get to market, just to give you a sense of how much the drug development timeframe was condensed for COVID vaccines. COVID fundamentally changed patient, provider, and pharma behavior, which created a massive opportunities for not only founders and innovators in the space, but frankly, also for investors like myself. I think this is really just the beginning of a massive wave of innovation that will be driven in part by cloud adoption.
Meantime, Pfizer and Merck, they've got a COVID pill that the FDA could approve at any moment. What should we be expecting for the course of drug development over the next year?
Yeah, one of the big predictions I have for 2022 and beyond is that the faster drug development processes that we've seen over the past 2 years are really likely to outlive COVID. There has been a massive amount of innovation around clinical trials in recent years. And one megatrend I'd like to point out is the emergence of something called decentralized clinical trials, DCT for short. These are virtual clinical trials where patients can participate in these trials from the comfort of their own homes and record data remotely through monitoring devices and through smartphones. DCTs are often cheaper. They reduce patient burden while increasing patient accessibility and retention. One company that is making waves in this market is a company called Medable, which is backed by Sapphire. They are a leading company that provides a cloud-native end-to-end solution that allows big pharma companies to run decentralized clinical trials end-to-end.
All right. Kathy Gao, much to watch for in the next year. Kathy Gao of Sapphire Ventures, thank you for joining us. Coming up, we're going to be joined by the founder of Girls Who Code, Reshma Saujani, to talk about how cryptocurrency is playing a part in its latest plan to narrow the digital divide. That is next. And as we head to break, let's take a look at Microsoft and AT&T. The telecommunications giant has agreed to sell its ad business Xandr to Microsoft for $1 billion. The transaction coming after the carrier decided that digital advertising wasn't central to its operations. This is Bloomberg. Girls Who Code, the organization that aims to close the gender gap in technology, is now accepting crypto as a form of payment for donations. The organization hopes it will open the door for more people to pledge their support to the movement. But will it? Joining me now, Girls Who Code founder Reshma Saujani. Reshma, thank you so much for joining us. What are the opportunities you see here by accepting crypto for education, empowerment, or increasing accessibility?
You know, one of the reasons why we decided to accept crypto is because we want our girls to not just fully participate in Web 3.0, but to reign it, to rule it. And, you know, what we have learned, or what I have learned the past 10 years in building Girls Who Code and trying to make Web 2.0 more inclusive and less exclusionary, is that it's really hard. You know, when an industry, when a platform is built without women and without people of color, it's hard to push our way in. And I think with Web 3.0, we have this huge opportunity with crypto and NFTs and anything else that's coming up, right? To have girls be a part of it from the ground up. And that's exciting to me.
Now, companies like Kickstarter, Discord, Reddit, Ubisoft, those are just a few of the companies that got blowback after announcing their crypto plans, and Girls Who Code also got some pushback. This from Twitter, someone tweeting, "Take note of the fact that only the people voicing support for this are people who've made it their entire personality. Nobody except grifters and marks thinks this is a good idea." What do you make of that, and how are you responding?
Look, I think there's a lot. Well, first of all, I wasn't surprised, right? And I think a lot of the pushback is around climate and around, potentially it being, a scam. I think that there's a lot of fear when there's something new. But here's the reality. 23% of Black Americans own crypto compared to 11% of white Americans. 50% of those that are crypto curious are women. This is a platform that is bringing in women and bringing in people of color. And if we want to solve those things, if we want to make, Web 3.0 more or less energy intensive, if we want to make it more inclusive, then we got to let women and people of color in from the beginning. And so we're not missing out and we're not sitting out. And we've learned too much from the past 10 years that is not a good idea for equality and for equity.
Now, as we get to the end of this year, I'm so curious what progress girls in STEM made over the course of 2021 and what impact the pandemic and the shift to remote learning has had.
It's been an incredible year. We just did a partnership with Doja Cat a few weeks ago. I think we got 13 billion impressions globally. 100,000 girls in one day logged on to basically code Doja Cat's nails, right? It inspired this enormous amount of excitement amongst girls for coding. So this is happening. This movement is happening. 10 years ago, I said that we wanted to teach 1 million girls to code, and we're getting there really fast. So we're really excited about the progress. But, as the variant is now popping its head up again, and you are seeing schools shut down, we're going back to remote learning, we still we still haven't solved the digital divide. There's still far too many kids that are getting Wi-Fi in Burger King parking lots. Far too many kids that don't have a device to learn how to code or to learn how to, just participate or be able to participate in school. And so we have a lot more work to do. I still think that we have to invest deeply in K through 12 education. We have to, in fact, this pandemic has showed us, that it's more important than ever, as every day another industry is automated by technology, that it's more important than ever that our children have an opportunity to learn and to be part of this new growth in 21st century jobs. And so we just got to double down on the education of our kids. But the reality is like we've made an enormous amount of progress in getting our girls interested. And when you look at the world, right, and you look at all the problems we have to solve, COVID, climate, cancer, it's going to be girls. It's going to be our kids that solve those problems.
So 2023, there have been concerns about women backsliding in 2022, 2023. Do you worry about that playing out, or are you hopeful? Are you more optimistic?
I mean, absolutely. I'm screaming it from the Marshall, from the mountaintops that we need a Marshall Plan for moms. As my son just opened up the door, right? It's bath time. And, all of us are trying to, be moms, be parents at the same time, of trying to maintain our full-time jobs. And it's not working. Millions of women are still being pushed out of the labor force. I mean, we just saw Joe Manchin stand in the way of paid leave and affordable childcare and the child tax credit and basically say, sorry, moms. No relief for you this Christmas. And so at Marshall Plan for Moms, we are doubling down on the change that we're going to make in the private sector. Still today, less than 4% of private companies offer subsidized childcare. The vast majority of companies say that they offer paid leave, but there's a huge amount of variability on whether it's 2 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. And for sure, the vast majority of men in their organizations don't take it. And we still have an enormous, motherhood penalty. The pay gap is attributed to the difference between our pays for moms and for dads. And so we got to change this. We should never let this crisis pass, without finishing this fight for gender equality once and for all. And Emily, it does frighten me that we're not paying attention, again, to the millions of people that have left the workforce, that we've had the largest exodus of women leaving the workforce in the history of our nation. It is a national crisis. But still, a few men are standing in the way of doing what is right. And I'm not standing for it. And we are building a movement to take moms from rage to power.
Reshma, thank you for calling attention to it with us. Reshma Saujani, Girls Who Code founder, thank you. for joining us. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We've got some great guests line up. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. I'll be back after New Year's and hope you have a safe and happy holiday.